What is leverage? Archimedes once said, "Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I can move the world." Now, there are obviously many forms of leverage, but economically speaking, the form we are concerned about is debt. Now, debt is described as leverage for a few reasons. Number one, it increases the strength of your purchasing power. If you have $1, instead of being able to spend just $1, maybe you can spend $1.50 or $2 or more. The second reason it's described as leverage is because it works both ways. In other words, debt increases risk. So what does leverage have to do with the boom bust cycle? Everything. As we will see, leverage is the engine that drives the boom bust cycle. On the way up, we are increasing the amount of leverage in the system, but everything that goes up must come down. And so every levering up is always followed by a deleveraging. And the way down, the bust, is a deleveraging. So where are we now? What will this deleveraging, this bust, look like? Well, first we have to understand how we got here. If you don't know who I am, my name is Joe Brown and I run Heresy Financial University, where I teach active investors how to get better returns with less risk by learning how markets actually work. Link to join me is in the description below if you are interested in becoming a member. Imagine with me a small fictional village located a few hundred years ago in the Wild West. This is an isolated village, so the economy operates as one complete unit by itself with no external inputs or outputs. At this time, the world was on a gold standard, so the money in this village is gold. But gold is very valuable, and so people don't want to use gold for their daily transactions, just to buy a sandwich or a beer at the bar. So what they do is they trust a third party called a bank to hold on to their gold for them. Now, they're paying this bank to hold on to their gold, and in return, they have a little piece of paper that says at any time they can turn that piece of paper back into the bank and get their gold. Because that paper can be used for redemption of gold, that paper can also be used as money itself. Instead of me taking my paper in to get gold, I can just use my paper as payment for a horse or a sandwich or a gallon of milk. And then whoever I paid could go take that piece of paper and get the gold instead. But one day the banker wakes up and realizes that nobody turns the paper in for redemption anymore. He's sitting on a vault full of gold that's not being used for anything. So he gets an idea. Instead of just operating a business of savings, he's going to start a business of loans. So he looks out at the marketplace of loans and realizes that every other person, if they want to make a loan, they have to give up some of their own spending power. This means that if Johnny borrows from Aunt Sally, then Aunt Sally is lending money that now she cannot spend. Therefore, the interest rate on debt is fairly high because the lenders want to be compensated for that lack of purchasing power that they now have. But the banker looks out and realizes, if I make a loan, I'm not giving up any of my own purchasing power. I'm just using somebody else's gold that's already in my vault. Therefore, I don't need to charge a very high interest rate on my debt. In fact, I can undercut literally every other lender. If the average interest rate out there is 5%, I can offer 4% loans, and then I will get all the loan business. And so that's exactly what the banker does. He says, I will offer a loan at a lower rate than anybody else is willing to offer. And because now there is debt available at a lower rate, that increases the demand for borrowers. Because before, Johnny may have said no to borrowing at 5% because that was just too expensive. But now that there's a loan available at 4%, he's all over it. So Johnny comes in and says, hey, my roof has been leaking and I've been dealing with it, but now that I can get a loan for 4%, I think it's worth it. So he borrows some money from the bank. And what does the bank do to create this loan? They take the exact same piece of paper that everybody else has that says, hey, you can redeem this for gold at any time. And he hands it to Johnny. At this point now, there's more paper floating around in the economy than there's actually gold that it could be redeemed for, but nobody knows that yet. So Johnny takes that paper and he goes straight to the roof repairman and he says, hey, I finally have the money. I'm going to pay you to repair my roof. Now the roof repairman has income that he wouldn't have otherwise. So the roof repairman takes some of his supplies, he goes and fixes the roof. Now he has to replenish his supplies. And so he buys more nails, he buys more shingles, and now the nail maker and the shingle maker have more income than they would have otherwise. But obviously the roof fixer, the roof repairman, he is running a profitable business, so he has profits he wouldn't have had otherwise as well. That means now he can buy those pair of shoes that he's been looking at. So he goes and buys shoes from the shoemaker. Now the shoemaker is in the same situation, more income and more profit than he would have had otherwise. As more and more people take out new loans, which is money being lent into existence, there's more money working its way throughout this little economy. This creates a false sense of a boom as prices start bidding up, as there's more income being used for more purchases. Everybody starts to feel more and more rich. But at some point, this upward spiral comes to a halt. Why? Because it was started by debt. So the very first person, let's say Johnny, who borrowed the money to fix his roof, at some point, he is going to earn money and not spend it so that he can take it and go pay off that debt. At this moment now, money is leaving circulation. It's being destroyed. It's getting sucked out of the economy. And somebody else who was now planning on having that extra income will not have that extra income. They will then be forced to spend less, which means the next person will not have income and they'll have to spend less. And so the cycle reverses itself and prices start to collapse back down. But before prices start to reverse themselves and things start to spiral back down the other way, the banker has a choice. They look out at the economy and they say, hey, look, if I just let things play out the way they are going to play out, I understand the debt will start to get paid off, prices will collapse back down, and we will have an unwind of this really great boom that I have generated for our local economy. And so if, me as a banker, I want to keep this going, all I have to do is lower interest rates a tad bit more. Because everybody just got tapped out on the debt, has borrowed as much as they can, but at 4%. So if I lower rates to 3%, now everybody can refinance their debt and then have extra income available, or get even more debt and then have even more income available, and their debt service cost stays the same. So that's exactly what the banker does, lowers the interest rate and restarts that whole cycle over again. If the banker continues along this path, eventually you get to the point where the currency loses value because the people start to realize there is way more money flooding around, prices are going up way too fast. Now people start to realize, hey, something is going on, and they exchange their dollars, their money, their paper for real wealth. In this case, it's the gold. You get a bank run. Way more money in circulation than people realize there's gold to back it up. Everybody rushes, there's a panic, a bank run, they run the banker out of town, the bank collapses, there's only so much gold as there used to be, prices collapse, debts collapse, defaults happen everywhere, and you get the inflationary deleveraging. But that is not the only outcome that is possible, because instead of deciding to lower interest rates, that banker could have just said, we're not going to touch things and we're just going to let things play out. And if the banker had then chosen just to let things play out, keeping interest rates the same, the debt would have started to get paid off, the amount of money in circulation would have started to collapse, income and expenses for everybody in the system goes down, and you still get an unwinding, and you still get the deleveraging, and you still get the austerity and the debt payoffs, and some people will default on their debt, and so you still get the deleveraging. It just happens from prices collapsing instead of prices hyperinflating. Both examples are deleveraging. They are both busts, and they both happen after the boom. As we can very clearly see from this example, prices alone do not dictate whether we are in a boom or a bust, because you can have an inflationary deleveraging or a deflationary deleveraging. Both of them are a bust. So where are we at right now? Well, in 2020, bankers, in this case central bankers like the Federal Reserve, looked at the economy and saw the unwind starting to happen. If they would have done nothing and kept things the same, we would have gotten the deflationary deleveraging. But bankers chose the first option, which was to lower interest rates, in this case to basically zero for everybody. That allowed everybody to take on new debt to pay off the old debt, so their debt service cost was lower, and it allowed people to take on even more debt. This caused a lot of spending and got the world dangerously close to hyperinflation. Now, fortunately, policymakers seem to have gotten in front of that now, and they seemingly have realized how close they got to a really bad mistake there, and they've been raising interest rates at a faster pace than they have in decades, trying to shift back to the second option. But this has not come without its own set of consequences. Remember, after a boom, you get a bust, whether it's inflationary or deflationary. By the way, guys, I'm going to be speaking at the Stock Pulse Silver Symposium about the history and future of sound money. It's in Las Vegas from September 29th through October 1st. There's going to be a ton of other great speakers there. There are going to be plenty of opportunities for us to do meet and greet, hang out, get some drinks together. I'd love to meet you there. And everybody who shows up is going to get 1 ounce of silver as well, a 1 ounce silver coin. So I'd love to see you there. There's a discount link, 10% off in the description below. So sign up there, get that discount, and tickets are running out, so sign up soon. One of those consequences has been a skyrocketing in the cost of government debt. The 30-year treasury for the US government is currently breaking out, along with short-term debt like the 2-year, 1-year, and shorter, near multi-decade highs. And remember, this is after we had a levering up. So more debt, and now that debt is starting to cost more and more. It is also resulting in a credit crunch to individual borrowers, with American consumers getting rejected for loans at the highest rate in 5 years. And the probability that a loan application would be rejected increased for all loans across the board. This is why the money supply is currently contracting at the fastest pace in almost 100 years. The last time the money supply was shrinking as fast as it is right now was the Great Depression. So on the path that we are on, credit is no longer increasing, it is shrinking. We are on a deleveraging path of deflation. Now, the quick and dirty of how this plays out, I've explained in past few videos in more detail, but basically, very soon, within the next couple of years, the government will not be able to afford its expenses. Yes, it takes a lot of money in taxes, but everything else it has to borrow. The amount it has to borrow to pay the rest of what it has to pay is increasing rapidly just to pay the interest on the debt, which means every time they borrow more to pay off their bills, that makes the next set of bills even more expensive because they have more interest on more debt. This is literally like trying to put a fire out with gasoline. The more you do it, the worse the fire gets. And so within the next couple of years, we will get to a point where the federal government will not be able to borrow enough to fund the deficit. At that point, the Federal Reserve, either by force or by choice, will step in and print money to bridge the gap. At that point, we will stop this deflationary path that we are on and we'll flip back over into an inflationary path. The difference is those lower rates, that easy financing, will only be available to the government this time. It will not be made available to everybody else. The Fed will still try and fight inflation by making it harder for everybody else, even though they're funding all the government spending. So we'll still get all the inflation from the government spending, but interest rates for everybody else will continue to move higher. Now, what this boom bust cycle of levering up and deleveraging makes very apparent is that the damage happens during the boom, not during the bust. So when policymakers try and stop the recession or the crash from happening, all they're doing is putting a Band-Aid over the symptom. The crash, the recession, this is just the realization of all the damage that occurred during the boom. The malinvestment, the misallocation of resources, and the investment in projects that would not be able to be brought to completion because they were operating on a false assumption of the size of the savings pool happened during the boom. There were miscalculations and errors in spending and investment. All of that takes place during the boom, and it's not until the correction starts, the recession starts, the crash, the bust starts, that everybody realizes it. And this is why a recession is called a correction. The recession is the cure for the malinvestment because it takes the resources away through bankruptcy from those who have wasted or been incompetent with those resources. It puts them on sale and allows the ones who have prepared and who have been paying attention and who are conservative and fiscally wise to take ownership of those resources. And to the extent that we have a transfer of ownership of assets from the wasteful, the incompetent, to the competent and the wise, we have more assets and resources available for everybody. More wealth, more abundance for all. You want the ones who are wasteful with resources and are incompetent to go bankrupt so that they get their resources taken away from them so they stop wasting finite resources. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. This quite literally means that the recession and the correction and the crash, the bust. This represents an opportunity for anybody who is prepared. Not something to be feared, this is something to be desired. As the common saying goes, money is made during bull markets, but fortunes are made during bear markets. So the bust is here. It has started. The fundamentals laid the groundwork, and now we're starting to see the prices play themselves out. It will start out as a deflationary deleveraging. We are heading into that phase now, and it could last a couple of quarters to a couple of years. How long it lasts simply depends on how long the government can stay solvent. The outlook for that is getting worse by the day, as recently Fitch Ratings just downgraded the United States long-term rating to AA+ instead of AAA. The reasons cited for this downgrade include the fiscal deterioration over the next 3 years, the growing debt burden, and the erosion of governance. And then once the Federal Reserve flips and starts printing money to finance the shortfall in government financing, then we switch back into inflation mode, but still deleveraging. Still deleveraging because it means higher rates and harder spending, harder, more painful economic times for everybody involved. There's a caveat to that though. Deleveragings do not have to be painful. In fact, we have many examples throughout history in which we did see a deleveraging without much economic pain. And the only thing that you need here is an increase in productive output, basically an increase in the total amount of wealth in the system that's enough to offset the deleveraging. For example, if you're making $100,000 a year and you owe $50,000 in debt, that would be pretty economically painful for you to pay that off. But if you get a new job and you go from making $100,000 to $200,000 a year, then your lifestyle could probably increase and get better, your quality of life, while you're deleveraging and paying off that debt, because you have so much more income that even though you are deleveraging, you don't experience any economic pain from that. Certainly you're worse off than you would be if you didn't have that debt at all, but the increase in your productive output allows you to deleverage without experiencing any economic pain relative to where you were before while you were levering up. Examples in the past where societies have deleveraged without experiencing much economic pain would be things like the Industrial Revolution, women joining the workforce, men coming home to work after World War II, semiconductors and transistors and the internet creating massive amounts of wealth for everybody, new jobs, new industries. These are all examples of things that increased the wealth so much that they covered up the pain of deleveraging. And though it may be hard to see, there are always things in the future that could lead to much similar increases in productive output and gains in total wealth. And just to name a few, here are some examples of a few things that are looking like potentials right now that, if they unfold over the coming years and decades, could absolutely produce enough wealth to offset any pain of deleveraging. One of them would be a resurgence in nuclear fission technology and creating many more nuclear reactors for energy across our country and our planet. Creating energy that is too cheap to meter, allowing for new technologies to be developed that we currently know are possible, but they are just prohibitive due to cost of energy. Things like desalination and free fresh water for everybody. Things like siphoning gasoline out of the literal air, so we could create fuel for internal combustion engines, making transportation much cheaper without impacting the grid and without impacting emerging markets with destructive mining techniques for things like battery electric vehicles. A second thing would be a millennial baby boom. Right now, the millennial generation is still in that sweet spot where it could turn out to have a big baby boom. And if this happens, the population increase, especially in nations like the United States, for instance, that are on the verge of a population collapse, it would be able to overcome that. We could have a massive increase in productivity, just like the last baby boom did. A third one would be artificial intelligence, not to mention all of the areas of our society that AI could potentially take over and do job better than humans, allowing humans to focus on things that they want to do more or that are more productive. Just like every time in the past, a machine has come in and replaced humans and allowed humans to do more productive things instead. More resources, less bottlenecks, human labor more productive. A recent one that I'm sure you heard of is LK99, the potential new room temperature ambient pressure superconductor. If this is proven to be real and as easy to create as the original paper made it seem, this could revolutionize energy transfer with lossless electricity transfer across grids, much more efficient computers with very little heat loss, futuristic things like maglev trains, enabling even things like quantum computing and nuclear fusion, which just happens to be the next thing on my list, nuclear fusion. Many people do not like nuclear fission, even though it's the cleanest and the safest and the most energy dense and the most abundant source of energy on Earth. Nuclear fusion would be a step even beyond that, solving the problems of nuclear fission like waste. And then finally, the last one that I'll mention here that doesn't require anybody else to do anything is a return to sound money. Because the reality is, if the boat is going down, all you have to do is get on the lifeboat. Everybody has the potential, the chance, the opportunity to create a lifeboat for themselves. Get some money outside the system. Whether the deleveraging is inflationary or deflationary, the bust is starting. Regardless of what policymakers decide to do, we all have the opportunity to just start using sound money. At least take a portion of your wealth. Buy some gold, some silver, some platinum stored in other countries. Buy some Bitcoin. Allocate a portion of your portfolio to these assets that are very difficult, if not impossible, to be confiscated. So you can go where you need to go, where you want to go, purchase whatever you need to purchase, when you want to purchase it, and exercise your God-given sovereignty as an individual. Just because the ship is going down wherever you were born, you don't have to go down with it. And the more people who exercise their sovereignty this way and create for themselves a lifeboat, the better off everybody will be. This is not one of those situations where if I leave the system, it makes it worse for everybody else. The more people that exit the system, the better off everybody is. The boom is done. The bust is here. Don't go down with the ship. Look out for opportunities because they're coming. As always, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.